I came home early because the doctor's appointment got canceled, and that's the only reason I caught it. If I'd come home at my usual time, I'd have walked into a clean kitchen, a quiet house, and never known. My daughter-in-law, no, wait, my wife, Carol, was on the kitchen floor on her hands and knees, her left ankle wrapped in an ice pack held on with a dish towel, scrubbing at a spill with her right hand because she couldn't put weight on it to stand. My son Tyler and his girlfriend Brianna were on the couch 12 feet away, watching a game show, eating chips out of the bag. Neither one looked up. I'm Frank Doyle. I'm 58 years old, and for 31 years I drove a forklift and ran a loading dock for a freight company outside Akron, Ohio, before my knees gave out and I moved into dispatch. I tell you that so you understand something about me. I'm not a dramatic man. I don't raise my voice. I solve problems the way I was trained to, quietly, efficiently, and only after I'm sure of what I'm looking at. That afternoon, I looked at what I was looking at for about 4 seconds. Then I said, "Tyler, Brianna, you have until tomorrow morning to be out of this house." Tyler laughed. He actually laughed, the way you laugh when your dad makes a joke that isn't funny but you're being polite. Then he saw my face, and the laugh died in his throat. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the backing up. Carol and I built our house 32 years ago on 4 acres outside a little town called Mosby, 20 minutes from Akron. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch Carol always wanted, a detached garage I converted into a workshop. We raised 2 kids in that house. Our daughter Megan lives in Columbus now with her own family, does great, calls every Sunday. No part of this story involves her. And I want to say that clearly because she gets nothing but credit in my book. This story is about our son, Tyler. Tyler is 29. Good kid, underneath it all, or at least he was, once. Smart enough to have gone further than he did. He fell into a rough patch about a year and a half ago. Lost a warehouse management job after a merger, then lost the apartment that came with it 6 months later when the severance ran out. Carol didn't even ask me. She just said, "He's coming home for a little while," and that was that. I didn't argue. What kind of father argues with that? A few months after Tyler moved back in, he started seeing a woman named Brianna he'd met working a temp shift at a call center. Within 2 months, Brianna had moved in too. I want to be honest with you about something, the way I wasn't honest with myself for a long time. I didn't love that. But Carol liked her well enough at first, and our house is big, and I told myself it was temporary, and temporary things you don't make a fuss about. That was 11 months ago. 11 months of temporary. Around month 7, things in our house started to feel different, though I couldn't have told you exactly how at the time. Tyler stopped looking for work with any real urgency. A phone call here, an online application there, but mostly he was on his computer, networking, which from where I sat looked a lot like scrolling. Brianna never got a job at all, not even part-time, though she always had somewhere to be nails, a hair appointment, lunch with a friend from her old job. Carol started cooking dinner for 4 every night instead of 2, doing 4 people's laundry, and I noticed but didn't really notice, if you understand the difference, that she'd started going to bed earlier and earlier, like she was just trying to get through the day so it would be over. Then, 3 months ago, Carol slipped on the back porch steps in the rain and came down hard on her left ankle. The ER doctor called it a bad sprain, not a break. But bad sprains on a 56-year-old woman aren't nothing. She was supposed to stay off it, elevate it, ice it 20 minutes on, 20 off. The doctor gave her a soft brace and a pair of crutches and told her, in front of me, no standing for long periods for at least 4 weeks. I work a 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. shift most days. That means there were 8 or 9 hours every weekday where Carol was home with 2 adults who weren't lifting a finger on a bad ankle, doing all the things she'd always done and now some things she shouldn't have been doing at all. I didn't know any of that. I want to be straight with you about that because it matters later. I didn't know because every evening when I walked in the door, the house looked fine. Dinner was on the table. Carol smiled. She always smiled. That woman could smile through a hurricane, and for 30 years I mistook that smile for everything actually being okay. The day I came home early, the smile wasn't there. That's how I knew before I even understood what I was looking at. I dropped to my knees next to her on that kitchen floor before I even looked at Tyler and Brianna. "What happened? What are you doing on the floor?" She tried to wave me off. "I'm fine, Frank. I just dropped a jar. I was cleaning it up. But I could see the ice pack was warm, which meant it had been there a while, and nobody had thought to swap it." I could see she'd been kneeling, not standing, because standing hurt too much, and kneeling on a sprained ankle on a tile floor is its own kind of stupid and its own kind of desperate. That's when I looked at the couch. "Did either of you see her fall?" I asked, not loud. I want you to understand, I never raised my voice that whole day. My voice gets quieter when I'm angry, not louder. Always has. Carol used to say that's how she knew it was serious when I went quiet. Brianna didn't even pause the TV. She said she was fine. "She's on the floor." Tyler shrugged. The way 29-year-olds shrug when they've decided a conversation doesn't apply to them. "She told us not to worry about it, Dad." I helped Carol up onto a kitchen chair myself, got a fresh ice pack from the freezer, propped her ankle on the chair across from her. And while I was doing that, something simple occurred to me. The kind of simple thing that hits you like a freight train precisely because it's so simple. My wife had been hurt, alone, on a floor, 12 feet from two healthy adults who chose a game show over getting up. That was the 4 seconds I told you about. That's when I said it. "You have until tomorrow morning to be out of this house." Tyler laughed. Then he stopped laughing. "Dad, come on. It's not that big a deal," she said. I don't care what she said. I still wasn't loud. I care what I saw. My mother, Carol's mother-in-law, I should say, though she'd passed years before any of this, so don't worry, there's no mother-in-law villain in this story. Just my own son used to tell me something when I was a boy that I'd forgotten until that exact moment. She said, "Frank, you can tell everything about a man by what he does when nobody's asking him to do anything." I'd spent 11 months not asking Tyler and Brianna to do anything because I didn't want to be the heavy-handed father, the guy who makes house rules for his grown kid. I realize now that not asking was its own kind of mistake. Some things shouldn't need to be asked. Brianna stood up off the couch for the first time. "Where exactly are we supposed to go tomorrow morning?" "I don't know, Brianna. I genuinely don't know, and I'm starting to realize that's not actually my problem." She looked at Tyler like he was supposed to fix this. He didn't say anything. I should tell you, since you're probably wondering, by the next morning, they hadn't left. I want to be honest about why, because it's not because I backed down. It's because Carol, even on that kitchen chair, ankle propped up, in real pain, looked at me and said, very quietly, "Frank, please, not like this, not tonight." And I am a man who, when his wife asks him something quietly, especially after a day like that, listens. So I told Tyler the ultimatum stood, but I gave them 2 weeks instead of one night, on one condition. Tyler had to actually start contributing, starting now, that night, cook dinner, do the dishes, help his mother to the bathroom if she needed it. 2 weeks to find a place. I thought that was reasonable. I thought, foolishly, that the shock of almost being thrown out that night would wake something up in him. It didn't. It just made him quieter and made Brianna meaner. That night, after Carol had gone to bed early, she was exhausted in a way I hadn't let myself see clearly before I couldn't sleep. I sat in my recliner in the dark living room with my phone, and an idea came to me that I'm not proud of but don't regret. We have a video doorbell and 2 security cameras Tyler himself had talked me into installing 2 years back, after a string of car break-ins in the neighborhood, one covering the driveway and front door, one covering the kitchen and the path from kitchen to garage, since that door gets used constantly. I'd genuinely forgotten the kitchen camera existed. I opened the app. I started scrolling back. I told myself I just wanted to understand the day better, see exactly how Carol fell, whether there'd been any warning Tyler and Brianna missed and genuinely didn't notice. There was no falling footage. The fall itself had happened on the back porch, off camera. But what I found instead, going back day by day, week by week, over the better part of an hour, was worse than a single missed accident. It was a pattern. Carol up at 6:15 every morning, making coffee and breakfast, packing my lunch, before Tyler or Brianna had even stirred. Tyler wandering in around 10, taking food from the fridge without a word, the way you'd take food from a hotel breakfast bar, not as a gift somebody made for you, just as a thing that exists for your convenience. Brianna sitting at the kitchen table on her phone, while Carol, even before the ankle, did 3 loads of laundry, folded, put away. One clip, 11 days before the fall. Carol struggling to carry a full laundry basket up the stairs, while Brianna sat at the bottom of those same stairs texting, not 6 feet away, and never once looked up. I kept watching. I made myself watch. 4 days before the fall, there was a clip with sound that I had to play twice, because I didn't believe what I'd heard the first time. Brianna, in the kitchen, talking to Carol's back while Carol cooked. I don't know why you make such a big production out of dinner every night. It's not like anyone's grading you. Carol said something I couldn't quite catch, conciliatory, the way she always was. Brianna laughed, not a mean laugh exactly, worse, a bored one, and said, "Okay, Susie Homemaker." Then she walked off with a plate Carol had made her. No thank you, nothing. 2 days before the fall, Tyler on the phone, presumably with a friend, in the garage where he didn't think anyone could hear. "Nah, man, it's actually kind of perfect right now. Free rent, free food, my mom does everything. It's basically like living at a bed and breakfast." A pause, then laughing. My dad? My dad's never going to actually kick us out. He just likes to act tough. He's all bark. I sat in that recliner with my own son's voice in my ear, calling our home a bed and breakfast and calling me all bark, and something in me went very still and very cold. Not angry the way you'd think, just clear. The way Carol's smile had finally cracked that afternoon. Something in me cracked too, except mine cracked into focus instead of into pieces. The next morning, I did something that surprised even me. I apologized. I found Tyler in the kitchen making his own coffee, for once, which felt like a small victory until I reminded myself what I now knew. I said, "I was hard on you both yesterday. I'm sorry. Your mother and I need to talk through the timeline together, that's all." Tyler's whole posture changed. Relief, then something close to smugness, settled into his shoulders. "Yeah, no, I get it, Dad. Things got heated. We'll figure it out." I nodded. I smiled. Inside, I felt sick. The same way you'd feel watching someone walk confidently toward a hole you know is there and they don't. Because here's what I understood that morning, watching my own son relax in front of me. He wasn't sorry. He didn't think there was anything to be sorry for. He thought the problem was that I'd overreacted. Not that he'd been letting his injured mother fall on a kitchen floor while he watched television. There was nothing to negotiate with a person who didn't believe he'd done anything wrong. So I stopped trying to negotiate. I started, instead, paying attention, gathering what I needed, and waiting for the right moment. The way I used to wait on the dock for a delayed shipment, not panicking, just watching the schedule, knowing eventually the truck would come. Over the following 10 days, I did 3 things. First, I talked to Carol, really talked, the way we should have months earlier. One evening, I sat on the edge of our bed and said, "I need you to tell me the truth. How long has it actually been like this?" She cried, a little, which broke something in me almost as much as the footage had, because Carol doesn't cry easily. She told me she hadn't wanted to say anything because she didn't want to come between me and Tyler, didn't want to be that mother-in-law, her words, not mine. Even though she's his actual mother who drives a wedge into her son's relationship, she'd been managing it alone, quietly for months, the same way she manages everything, because that's who Carol is, and I'd let her because I'd been telling myself temporary instead of paying attention. I told her something I meant with my whole chest. You don't have to manage this by yourself anymore. Whatever happens with Tyler, you come first. Always. I should have made that clear a long time ago. She didn't say much back. She just held onto my hand a long time. Second, I went and saw Carol's brother, my brother-in-law Pete, who happens to be a real estate attorney in Akron, not because I wanted a lawsuit, but because I wanted to understand what I actually owed Tyler legally, not emotionally if this went sideways. Pete listened to the whole thing and then asked me one question I haven't stopped thinking about since. "Frank, who exactly are you protecting right now?" I said, "Tyler, I guess, and Carol, and I didn't really know." Pete said, "That's usually the problem. You can't protect both sides of a situation where one side is hurting the other." I left his office without any paperwork, but with something a lot more useful clarity about whose side I was actually supposed to be on. Third, and this is the part I'm least proud of, but I'd do it again, I started keeping a folder. Printouts of 2 specific bank statements, because around this same time I discovered Tyler had used the joint family emergency debit card, the one Carol and I had set up years ago for genuine emergencies, and that Tyler still had access to from before he moved out the first time, for things that were very much not emergencies. A $340 charge at a golf simulator lounge, 2 separate charges at a steakhouse in Akron, a $95 charge for what turned out to be a video game season pass, almost $900 over 6 weeks. Nobody had asked me. Nobody had mentioned it. When I brought it up calmly at dinner, "Tyler, you've used the emergency card a fair amount lately." He went quiet for half a second, the exact same half second I'd later learned to recognize as the sound of someone deciding how much to lie. Then, "I was going to pay you back once I get my first paycheck from the new job." There was no new job. There had never been a new job. I let it go that night. I wanted more than one data point before I used it. The 2-week deadline I'd set landed on a Saturday, the same Saturday, as it happened, as my 60th birthday party, which Carol's whole side of the family had been planning for a month, since I'd be turning 59 that year, but everyone insisted on celebrating it big regardless. You know how families are. It was being held at my brother-in-law Pete's place, out past Hudson, big property, a pole barn he'd fixed up for parties, plenty of parking for a couple dozen cars. Carol and I drove out together that Saturday afternoon, her ankle in the brace still, but walking on her own now, slow but steady. Tyler and Brianna followed in their own car, 20 minutes behind, which already told me something. They didn't want to ride with us, didn't want the conversation that might happen in a closed car. I knew before we even got there that this wasn't going to be an ordinary birthday party. I'd overheard by accident, the same way I'd overheard everything else in this story. Walking past the garage 3 nights earlier, Brianna on the phone with someone saying, "Yeah, his whole family's going to be there. It's the perfect time to set the record straight about how Frank's been treating us." I didn't say anything. I just kept walking and kept my folder ready. The party was good for the first 2 hours. My side of the family, Carol's side, neighbors we'd known for decades, a couple of Tyler's old high school friends. Pete had a pig roasting since morning. My nephew's kids were running around the yard. Normal noise, the kind I love, the kind that's the whole point of having a big family in the first place. Then, after the cake, after people had sung, Brianna stood up with a glass of lemonade in her hand like it was champagne and said she wanted to say a few words. The yard quieted down out of politeness, the way people do for a toast. "I just want to say," she started, "that Carol has been the most welcoming, wonderful mother-in-law I could ask for, and it kills me to see how she's been treated lately." A few confused looks. "My cousin Diane actually said, out loud, 'Treated how?'" Brianna pressed on. "Frank's been giving Tyler and me an incredibly hard time, threatening to throw us out over nothing, really laying into Carol too. Honestly, the stress of it all probably had a lot to do with her getting hurt in the first place." There it was, the reframe. Not "we let her fall while we watched TV." Instead, the stress Frank caused made her fall. I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't say a word yet. I wanted to hear the whole performance first, the way you let a man finish digging before you hand him the shovel he actually needs. A few relatives shifted, uncomfortable. My Aunt Roberta, 74 years old, the one woman in our family nobody, and I mean nobody, argues with set down her fork. Tyler jumped in to back Brianna up, talking about how things have been tense and how he just wanted everyone to get along, carefully avoiding a single specific detail because specifics were the one thing he didn't have. That's when Aunt Roberta turned, not to me, not to Brianna, but to Carol. "Sweetheart," she said gently, the kind of gentle that cuts right through a room, "how are you doing, really?" The yard went quiet in the particular way. 30 people go quiet at once, all the conversation stopping mid-sentence like someone hit pause. Carol froze for a second. I watched her hands, resting on her lap, tighten around her own fingers. Then she looked up, and I knew the same way I'd known something was wrong that day on the kitchen floor, that she was finally about to tell the truth. "I'm okay," she said first automatically, the way she always says it. Aunt Roberta shook her head. "No." "How are you really doing, honey?" And Carol, my wife, who has apologized her way through 32 years of never wanting to be a bother to anyone, took a breath, looked at her own hands, and started talking. She wasn't loud. She didn't perform it the way Brianna had performed her toast. She just told the truth plainly, the way Carol tells everything. She talked about the months of doing all the cooking and cleaning for 4 people instead of 2, with no help offered. She talked about the comments, Susie Homemaker, and worse ones I hadn't even known about, including one where Brianna had told a mutual friend, within Carol's hearing, that Carol needed a hobby besides waiting on everyone hand and foot. She talked about the day she fell, the ice pack going warm because nobody thought to swap it, kneeling on the tile floor because standing hurt too much. 12 feet from a couch where 2 grown adults sat watching television. Nobody at that party moved, not even the kids, who'd gone quiet without anyone telling them to. Brianna tried, once, to interrupt. Okay, that's really not fair. We offered to help plenty of, and my cousin Diane, of all people, cut her off flat. Nobody asked you, Brianna. Let her finish. When Carol got to the part about overhearing secondhand, through me, though she said she'd suspected as much for a while that Tyler had called our home a bed and breakfast to his friends, my Uncle Dale, Carol's uncle, asked the question that finally cracked the whole thing open. Tyler, if your mother was doing everything on a bad ankle, what exactly were you contributing? Tyler opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked at Brianna. Brianna looked at her lemonade. That's when I stood up, walked into the house, and came back with the folder. I didn't make a speech. I'm not a speech-making man. I just handed Pete the 2 bank statements, the golf simulator charge circled in pen, the steakhouse charges circled, the $95 Game Pass circled, and said, "This is the emergency card. These are 6 weeks of charges." There was no emergency. The folder went hand to hand around that table, the way the credit card statements had at every family gathering like this one I'd ever heard of, and the silence that followed wasn't angry. It was worse than angry. It was disappointed. Aunt Roberta looked at Tyler for a long moment, then said quietly, "I think we have our answer." Nobody argued with Aunt Roberta. Nobody ever does. The party didn't explode. Nobody screamed. Nobody threw anything, which I think surprised people more than if it had. It just slowly, quietly came apart at the seams. The way ice breaks up on a pond in March, you don't hear one big crack, you hear 100 small ones. People drifted over to check on Carol. A few, including my own brother, pulled Tyler aside privately, not to yell at him, but, from what I gathered later, to ask him, man to man, what exactly he thought he was doing. Brianna left within the hour, alone, saying she had a headache. Tyler stayed, quieter than I'd seen him in years, and at the end of the night, before we left, he found me by my truck. "Dad," he said, "I didn't realize how bad it actually got. I thought Mom was exaggerating half the time when she'd get quiet about stuff." "She wasn't exaggerating," I said. "She was protecting you from how it actually looked." He didn't have an answer to that. I didn't expect one yet. Within 10 days, Tyler and Brianna had moved out into a small apartment Tyler found on his own. The first thing, as far as I know, he'd actually handled himself in over a year. Brianna and Tyler split up about 3 weeks after that. I genuinely don't know the details, and I haven't asked, because it's not my business, and because, selfishly, our house got quieter and easier to breathe in the moment she left it. The house felt strange those first few mornings, the way a room feels strange after you take a heavy piece of furniture out of it emptier, but also, somehow, like there's finally room to walk through it properly. Carol's ankle healed up fully over the next month. I watched the dark circles under her eyes fade the same way I imagined David watched Emily's fade. Though, of course, I didn't know that story when I was living mine. I'm only telling you because somebody else told me about it, oddly enough. And it sounded a lot like ours, which I suppose tells you something about how common all this actually is. A few weeks after they moved out, Tyler called and asked if he could come by for dinner, just him. I said, of course. He showed up with a six-pack and a kind of nervousness I hadn't seen on him since he was a teenager asking to borrow the truck. Over dinner, he told his mother he was sorry, really sorry. Not the kind of sorry that's actually an apology for getting caught. He'd gotten a job, a real one, doing inventory management for a logistics company, not unlike the one I'd spent half my life at. And he told me, almost shyly, that he'd thought about me a lot at that job, about how I never complained about 31 years on a loading dock. I told him I was proud of him for the job. I didn't tell him I was prouder of him for finally saying sorry, because some things a father just keeps to himself. Carol and I still talk about that day on the kitchen floor sometimes, usually on quiet evenings on the porch, the one she always wanted built 32 years ago. I asked her once why she never told me how bad it had gotten, all those months, and she said something I think about often. I didn't want to make you choose between us. I told her there was never actually a choice to make. There's her. And then there's everyone else. And I'd just forgotten that order for a while, because I didn't want to be the kind of father who makes his son feel unwanted in his own childhood home. Here's what I've come to understand, looking back on the whole thing now. This wasn't really a story about kicking my son out, even though that's the part that probably made you want to know what happened. It was a story about a man who spent decades being the steady one, the reliable one, the guy who shows up and does the work and doesn't make waves, and who let that same instinct The instinct to keep things calm and steady blind him to the one person who needed him to make waves on her behalf. Carol never asked me to choose her. She never would have. That's exactly why I had to learn to choose her anyway, without being asked. The same way my own mother used to tell me, you find out who a man really is by what he does when nobody's asking him to do anything. If you've ever had family living under your roof who forgot that a household runs on more than just somebody else's exhaustion, you understand exactly what I'm talking about. And if you're the one who's been doing the kneeling on the kitchen floor while somebody else watches television 12 feet away, I hope somebody in your life notices before a doctor's appointment happens to get canceled and your husband or your wife or whoever loves you comes home early enough to finally see it for himself. Sometimes love doesn't announce itself with grand gestures, it shows up as noticing. Noticing the warm ice pack, the tired smile, the quiet that's grown too quiet. We get so busy keeping the peace that we forget peace was never meant to cost someone we love their dignity. The real strength isn't in staying calm forever. It's in finally standing up, gently but firmly, for the person who never asked you to. A small note for you. This story was imagined and written by AI for entertainment, but the heart behind it, noticing the people we love before it's too late, is something real worth carrying with you.